This was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country and maybe beyond.
President Donald Trump's inauguration is only hours away in a sense, and there's a lot of speculation on what that means for India. Now, Trump 1.0 had mixed reviews about the relationship in some sense of when it came to immigration, but then we did see strengthening of relationship with India in terms of defense sector, intelligence and businesses as such. Now that President Trump is coming back to the White House, we've got with us Mukesh Aghi, who is the chairman of USISPF, one of the most influential organizations based here in Washington, D.C., to talk about what he expects from Trump 2.0. Mukesh, thank you so much for doing this. First question to you, just from your experience, what are the few first things that comes to your mind, especially thinking from American perspective that they would want to work with India under this new administration?
Well, you have to understand Trump 2.0, the global situation is so different than Trump 1.0. China economically is weaker. Middle East is in turmoil, but Iran is kind of weakened. You have Ukraine-Russia war going on, and they would like to come to some kind of terms how to make a deal itself. In the US, the economy is booming, and what you have is unemployment at a very, very low level itself. So it's a very, very different scenario coming in. So what we will see is sweeping changes coming from Trump administration, geopolitically and domestically. When I say geopolitically, India becomes critical from that perspective because Trump team sees India as a partner which can take on an aggressive and assertive China. And so India becomes very pivotal from that perspective. India becomes pivotal from de-risking of supply chain. Yes, Trump is making effort by putting tariffs to bring in industry back to the US, but that won't happen overnight. And you'll have high-end industries coming in, but others will have to find places. And Vietnam has capacity issues, Cambodia has capacity issues. India becomes pivotal from that perspective. So in every aspect, geopolitically, economically, people to people, and from technology perspective, India becomes critical part of Trump's agenda in the next 4 years.
Tariffs have been talked about. Anticipation about that. What would that mean for Indian businesses? Is there any, I probably shouldn't use the word framework, but anything that you can, share, like conversations you had with people, senior people here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, tariffs is a way of negotiation on part of Trump.
Okay.
You have to understand tariffs eventually end up in people's expenses. And they have to pay the higher price for any tariffs you put in goods coming in. But that also has an inflationary impact. And that means it has impact on interest rate. And that has impact on growth of real estate itself. So tariffs from every aspect will be used as a negotiation ploy to work out partnership with other countries on a trade agenda. For the first time, China's trade surplus crossed $1 trillion. The trade surplus with India has roughly around $45 billion. And that can be addressed very easily by India buying more energy goods from the US. So I don't think issues with India on tariffs will be critical as we all think about, because India will adjust to that.
What areas of cooperation do you think can Trump find in terms of, you've obviously seen President Biden, trying to incorporate as much as he could. Are there certain other areas that, Biden couldn't deliver and that Trump may be looking at?
I think you have to look at the partnership in multiple categories. One is geopolitical. So the Quad becomes critical in the Indo-Pacific region. Now the question is how do you take the Quad, which is a security umbrella, into an economic partnership? If you look at the 4 countries who are members of the Quad, the GDP is around $35 trillion. How do you basically assimilate this into a common market so there are more free movement of goods, services, and mobility of people itself? Then you have what you call as I2U2, which is another quad on the Western Front. And then you have IMAC, which is India, Middle East, European corridor. And with the Gaza settlement coming through, this corridor becomes very important, especially countering the China's brick and mortar road itself. So I think from that perspective, geopolitically, India becomes very, very pivotal. As far as the economic goes, yes, the trade is around $200 billion. We need to think about how you take it to $1 trillion. And it is good for India because I think export drives domestic economy also. And India also becomes critical in the global supply chain for the US companies. But also more important is, as India's $4 trillion economy goes into $5 trillion economy, it becomes market opportunity for US companies. Classic example is Apple, which 4 years ago almost had very minimal revenue in India. It moved its manufacturing to India. 25% of iPhone 16 this year are being manufactured in India itself. But more important is Apple's domestic sales in India has crossed $5 billion. So I think it's not just about in leveraging India from global supply chain, but it's also about India's market opportunity.
A lot of conversation in the US when it comes to India is, and then fortunately, unfortunately, comes from the prism of China, and we've seen a lot of people in the current administration, also probably incoming, they always talk about, we need a counterbalance to China. Is China become the new, sort of, and I probably don't know how to say this, but is that the prism everybody's looking at India and trying to build a closer partnership with India because they think India as a democracy could sustain some of the global challenges that another country would not be able to?
Well, you have to understand there is a sense of domination on part of US, both from a economy perspective, technology perspective, and definitely on the military aspect. And if you look at after the Second World War, it was the Soviet Union which became I call the enemy to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And after the collapse of Soviet Union, basically there was absolutely kind of US pure domination itself. And yes, there were, I call transaction wars, which was like Iraq and Afghanistan, but it was more focused towards dealing with the ISIS and other aspect of terrorist group itself. But there was never a concept of total war.
Mm-hmm.
And what we are seeing for the first time, the war between Russia and Ukraine is a total war, where you basically drive your economy towards the winning of the war. So if 40% of the Russian GDP is focused on Ukraine war itself. So now what we have is from every aspect, a nation such as China, which is coming up. It is economically powerful, military very powerful, technologically probably advanced, ahead of US also in a lot of category itself, controls the critical mineral supplies in every category itself. So it is a challenge which US has not faced since Second World War. And I think from our perspective, it needs partners, allies to counter the aggressive posture. You have to understand from India's perspective, China sees India not as an equal partner. It will never ever treat India as an equal partner. So China does not appreciate the rise of India. China does not appreciate India's partnership with the US itself. So it is in the interest of the United States and the interest of India to have this closer partnership to deal with the aggressive China.
Trump has gone on the record to say he wants to have Canada as a 51st state, have Greenland. I mean, he's going to be the president, but how serious are these, ideas within the administration, you think?
Well, you have to understand, obviously with Canada is more of a negotiation aspect, because if you look at a large number of illegal migrants are coming from Canadian border itself. Now, as far as Greenland goes, there are histories of where American Samoa, Puerto Rico, which are part of U.S. territory,
right?
But they voted independently to join U.S. And if Greenland decides to do that, It makes economic sense to Greenland, which has around 56,000 people only. It makes geopolitical sense because it gives U.S. access to the Arctic arena much more, closer to Russia also. So I believe it's a brilliant move where it sends a strong message. But at the same time, but as you have to understand, it has to be done democratic. You cannot intimidate or basically use force to acquire a nation. Then how do you justify China taking over Taiwan? How do you justify Putin taking over Ukraine if the U.S. does the same thing?
Okay. Talked about illegal migrants. Immigration has been a hot topic last month. A lot of Indian companies and Indian American Congress people have come under attack because of the defense of the H-1B visa. How do you see the visa process? Or do you think Trump will take actions to curb H-1B visas, as some of the MAGA people have been asking me, or you think he will encourage the work visa in his administration?
Well, you have to understand illegal migration has an impact on legal migration. And the third largest illegal migrants today are Indians. And they are coming in mainly from the Canadian border.
Mm-hmm.
And and also the largest acquirer of H-1B visas are Indian, almost 70%. And so there is I call correlation between the two. It gives the ammunition to MAGA to basically curtail the H-1B. But you have to understand that the U.S. company needs the talent.
Mm-hmm.
But also there has been abuse of H-1B by smaller staffing companies from India. We need to figure out how to stop that. It is important to understand, for every 10 H-1B visa which are rejected, 9 of those jobs move out of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
For every 10% of the visa which are rejected on the H-1B, it has an impact of $86 billion on the GDP. So H-1B visa works good for the American companies. It makes them competitive. It makes them more efficient. But at the same time, we want to make sure the right people are coming in, and that's not being abused also.
Okay. You hosted NSA Jack Sullivan yesterday at USISPF. What was the conversation like? What did he talk about? Assuming some of his accomplishment and some of the things to look forward to. Can you share some of that?
Yes, some I can't share because it was a closed door, but I think more important is he is the architect of building a strong relationship with India. He's the one who created the concept of ISET. He's the one who pushed on Quad becoming much more closer. He's the one who has pushed on IMAC itself. And the objective of the discussion was, will this continue with the new administration? How will this transition new administration? And we got the assurance that this will continue with the new administration, because you have to understand those are important goalposts for US-India partnership. They're important from technology perspective. I would say today GE engines would not be manufactured in India because ISET came through. So I think from that perspective, we feel assured what has been started by Jake Sullivan and the Biden administration will continue with the Trump administration also.
One last question, Mukesh. If you were to give advice how to make America great again, what would be your advice to the incoming administration?
Well, you have to understand, you have a nation which has always made effort other countries to succeed. After Second World War, it basically rebuilt Japan. It rebuilt Europe. After Vietnam War, it helped rebuilding Vietnam itself. And today what we have is a large number of Americans who don't see that success of economic growth of the country itself. And so what basically has won Trump is the vote of these, I call people whose basic ambitions are not being met. And we feel that by creating jobs, by bringing manufacturing, it's going to help them. And I think that's where India can work together with the US by basically helping bring high-end manufacturing back to the US, but taking the low-end manufacturing in India itself and completing in the US. So, for example, Today, U.S. has embarked on building chips in the U.S. So you have plants in Ohio, in New York, in Arizona, but they are more like 7 nanometers and below, very complex chip. India is focused on building chips in India, which is focused on 15 nanometers and above. And those are industrial-grade chips. So India can focus on building those chips, U.S. can focus on those high-end chips, and they can collaborate together and supply each other from that perspective. So I strongly believe Make America Great Again and Atmanirbhar Bharat can work together and make both countries successful.
All right. Thank you so much, Mukesh. We are all eagerly waiting for day one of Trump administration. Some have promised it's going to be a day of shock and awe, but the India-US relationship, the consensus is stronger than ever. This is Rohit Sharma.